we have a really fun guy we're going to be talking to. His name is Bill Prinzivalli, a nice Italian name. Bill, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Connie, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we're going to be talking about do you for, improvisational leaders and how to use improv in your business to connect the right brain to the left brain. So this should be a very interesting conversation. But first, I have to ask you the question I ask everybody: were you a leader as a child?
Oh, goodness. As a child, I would say no. Uh, as a child, I think I was a follower. Grew up in a Italian American family in Brooklyn, and sort of the mantra was keep your head down so you don't get hurt. so so I would not call myself a leader. I would call myself a person that had to learn how to be smart enough to live on the streets without getting hurt. So sort of a navigational issue.
So, how did you take what you learned living on the streets to become a corporate leader person? How did that happen? What are the lessons you learned from living on the street that helped you, or being on the street?
Great. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Three things came to mind when you asked that question. First, the lessons I learned on the street is to be aware and to be wise, to watch what's going on, because there's a lot of moving parts on the streets. Some that are dangerous, some that are not. So you had to be alert, be aware, and discern who you can interact with, who you shouldn't, who you should fight, who you shouldn't. A lot of discernment and a lot of decisions, right? Because you always have to look at the outcome and the consequences of that. You know, if some kids come up and say, hey, give me a nickel. I had to do an assessment. This guy's smaller than me. Is he bigger than me? Does it look like he wants to fight? Or the two of them? It's always an assessment. Sometimes I give the nickel. Sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes it's a bluff. Sometimes it's a fight. So a lot of discernment.
I love that. Well, and just think how valuable that is when you're in the corporate world.
Yeah. In the corporate world, any world. I mean, you're always watching, assessing. It's okay. What do I got here? So yeah, I mean, that served me well. The other thing that served me well as a child was to work hard and achieve, because we did not grow up in wealth where nothing was handed to us. We had to work hard for everything. So my parents, who worked like the devils in sweatshops just to put food on the table, they basically said, listen, go to a good school, go to college, get a degree so that you can live a better life than we. So that's what we did. And we just worked hard so that we could get a better life. So that growing up in that kind of environment gave us the good, work ethic to, you got to work for what you want to get, and yeah, pull yourself up.
I have to say, I think as baby boomers, I think many of us had that experience where our parents wanted us to be better than we were or what they had it. I grew up on a farm in Nebraska, and the one thing I can say, even though I was a child in the 50s, and back then women were in the kitchen, or they were having babies, or maybe they were a teacher or a secretary, something like that, but they didn't have careers as per se.
Right.
But my mom was such an amazing she didn't have to say you could do anything you want to do. She did it. So she would be on the tractor, she would be butchering the pigs and the chickens and gathering the eggs and plowing the fields, and then she'd come in and she'd make an amazing meal. Our house, you could have eaten off the floors, and she had a full-time job.
Yeah.
So, I mean, growing up with those kinds of examples and parents encouraging you to go to a good school and to get a good job. And I mean, I think that really is part of it, I think, is lacking in today a little bit.
Yeah, I think it depends on the family setting, of course. If the family setting is such that the parents give everything to the child, don't have to work for it because they're very wealthy, and maybe they're doing it out of love as well. Maybe they're doing it because they wanted to give their kids something better than they had. But if they overdo it, of course, then the kids don't learn how to fight for what they need and to work for what they need. So yeah, it's a balance. And I've always said parenting is something that is impossible to get right. And I said if you ever have an ego or you get a swelled head, have a child, because you will feel very inept
Totally. And when they get to be a certain age, they remind you of that.
Oh, of course. When they're very young, you're god and goddesses. When you're a teenager, when they're a teenager, you're nothing. And then, of course, when they get older, maybe you're something in between. So yeah, we go through it. Parenting is such a life lesson. I wish it on everybody.
Yeah, exactly. The best part is when you can say to your child, now you understand what I went through.
Yes, and of course they say sometimes, yeah, they say no, but then when they have kids, then we can empathize with them. Yeah, you can't describe it, right? Like people like people that are not fortunate enough to have children, they can't understand that. So in that sense, it's a different life experience.
Definitely. So, how did you go? How'd you get from the streets to the corporate world?
Yeah, well, we went to Catholic schools, which were very good, grammar school and high school, and college. We worked our ways to get to college. My folks kicked in a few bucks. I worked a couple of jobs, a little bit of scholarships, just scraped to get it through. And so I got a degree at an engineering school in mathematics and got a good job. And at that point, though, my goal was not to have a company of my own. That was never in the cards. I mean, we had no models or examples of that. My goal was to just be in the corporate world and become maybe a vice president, ultimately, and retire with a nice pension. That was the security that my folks didn't have, right? And we had everything else. We had love, camaraderie, friendship, health, etc. But that was the thing that needed to be, quote, fixed. So that was my goal. I never wanted to have my own company. But then it just sort of happened. I mean, it just sort of happened. I was the vice president, by the way, was the only title I never had in corporate America, which is interesting. And that was the goal. I was a director of, first I was in technology and computer programming and mathematics. And then I got into the sales of computer software, mostly because I saw the unfairness of people getting raises because they would, kiss up to the boss or do something politically. And I couldn't handle that. So I just said, where could I go where I get compensated exactly for what I do? And it was sales. So I sold computer software and worked up my way into management, directorship, et cetera. And then at one point, there were layoffs, things changed, and a company had some software that they wanted me to represent as an independent contractor. So I just went as an independent contractor. But so that was my original movement from corporate America to independence. And then that just grew and grew and grew. I mean, I was in my basement alone, and then there were 4 or 5 people in my basement, and then the condo police threw me out because I was taking up too many parking spaces, and the FedEx was coming every day. So I had an office, and the company just grew every couple of years. It grew to about 50 people. We were doing about $10 million in annual revenue. Then all of a sudden, I had a big company now. Well, it's a small company, but big for me.
Right.
Oh.
So, how long ago you sold the business, right?
Yes, that business I started in '86, and it went through beyond 2000 because we ended up having Y2K software, and then after that it sort of declined. So it rose. We had to decline. The ups and downs of businesses are just everlasting. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know.
Part of business.
Yeah, it's just part of it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, so then you sold your business, and then what?
Well, then I started 3 other businesses. One was another software company with a friend of mine who had software for the ambulance squads in New Jersey. That was very successful. We were doing extremely well until the state gave these ambulance squad a package for free. So obviously we couldn't compete with that. Then I started another company with a scientist from Eastern Europe, where we imported some technology that was sort of body, mind, physicality type of thing, diagnostic tools. And we did well for that for a couple of years, but then the manufacturer couldn't keep up with the competition. And so that dissolved. But all along the way, I was doing consulting, because at this point now I started 4 companies of my own. I was in the corporate world, so people were calling me for help in marketing. CEOs were calling me for strategic directions, et cetera. So for the past 10 plus years, I've been doing a lot of consulting for corporations, small and large.
Okay, so in the title we called this "Integrating the Right Brain with the Left Brain."
Yeah.
And your book is Improvisational Leaders.
Yeah.
So how does that all have
Yeah.
anything to do with the corporate world, and how in the world did you get into that?
Yeah, good question. Uh, Actually, most of my life, in addition to being in the corporate world, I've been in the world of mindfulness, meditation, yoga, etc., since really 1970, so about 50 years worth. In fact, I studied so much in that arena that I almost went into that full time, and I almost left the business world, where I might have gone into the world of mindfulness, maybe acupuncture, etc. So I've always had that avocation very strongly, as I said, to the point where I almost moved into that full time. So always wanted to integrate those two. And so I used to teach classes in the 90s and the 2000s to anybody that would listen, usually in the adult education classes, to the local centers in New Jersey and New York, where I told them, why are we only using a left brain? Because in school, the education system, we're taught content, left brain material, whether you're an accountant, an engineer, whatever you are. In business, we're still taught the same thing. There's an entire right brain that we're not using. And of course, neuroscience now tells us that the right brain and left brain are not split the way they thought it was in the 1960s. And I explained all of that in the book. But still, the vernacular is right brain, left brain, meaning linear and nonlinear thinking. So the nonlinear thinking, or the right brain, is all about intuition, creativity, and nonlinear thinking. So we're not taught any of that in the business world or in our education system, and that's half the resources of our mind. So I would teach people to use that. So what's an example? Well, I mean, did you ever have a situation where you had to make a major decision? So you use all of your left brain action, all the calculations, the linear calculations. But then you say, you know what? I'm not ready to make a decision. I want to sleep on it, right? How often do we say that? Or I want to go walk in the woods and just relax. I want to chill out. So what are you actually doing there? You're actually quieting the left brain and allowing the right brain to breathe and function. All right. That happens in our sleep. That happens if we walk on the beach. It happens if we meditate. And that allows the intuitive mind, the right brain, to process the data that's already in the mind. All right. And only when both sides agree should we make that forward decision. One of my CEOs from one of the software companies I worked for, he always said, if I have a major decision to make, I have to, after I make my decision, I have to sleep on it for 3 nights, and one of those nights has to be a weekend. Then I'll feel comfortable that it's a good decision. So it's the right brain and left brain integration that I advocate. And it doesn't matter where it starts. In other words, sometimes an idea can start from the right brain, like an intuition, right? But the reason the intuition gets a bad rap is when you don't check it out with the left brain. In other words, if you just act impulsively on it. But if you get an intuition about something, follow the intuition, work it out, and then obviously use the left brain. Check out the numbers, check out the data, check out the linear information. And when both sides, the linear and nonlinear parts of our brains and our resources agree, then we move forward, and usually that decision is much, much better.
Wow. Well, in my book, Crystalline Moments, I talk about crystalline means sparkly or clear moments of clarity. And when you're making those kinds of decisions, being able to listen to your instinct and being able to apply the numbers and do all the practical stuff, but at the same time being able to understand that your intuition is actually guiding you into the direction
that
you're really supposed to be going. So that's a really good example of how you can use the right brain along with the left brain. And you're right. That's a conversation that most people have.
No, they don't, because they usually say something like, well, how does it work out? In other words, they want the physical proof of the intuition. Well, physical proof is a left brain function. You can't prove, something from the right brain by using the left brain, and vice versa. So we basically just have to respect both. And in this country, I think, and in our education system, we don't respect the right brain resources as much as we should, even though people like Einstein and Edison and all of these amazing people that we have in our country have advocated for it. We still don't respect it as much, and sometimes we actually diss it and say, listen, that's nonsense. So I just want to bring equal respect, not greater, but equal respect to the left and functionality.
That makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. So, well, tell us a little bit about your book that's coming out. When is it? You said it's coming out in a week or two?
Probably next month. I mean, it's all written, it's edited, it's being laid out in the galley right now, and the cover design. So about a month. Yeah, it's called Improvisational Leaders, and it's basically the book I wanted to write back in the 90s and 2000s when I used to teach the class about left brain, right brain. It's that plus a whole large section now on improvisation. Now, where did that come about? I mean, I just fell into improvisation about 10 years ago. That's a whole nother story. And I found it very compelling. And I also surprisingly found that the benefits are phenomenal and can be brought into the corporate world. And I'll explain that in a minute if you like. So what I did is I added that an entire section of improvisation, its principles and its benefits, and how it can be applied into the business world. So we've got all of the items of mindfulness and meditation, how that can be applied, how that mindfulness can be applied in our daily activities, from working, from de-stressing ourselves, from being on a bank line, to using improvisational techniques. And then a professor friend of mine who I've become friends with now also added a chapter in there about conscious organizations and how they basically have to improvise every day because things are so complicated. So the book is basically for leaders, CEOs, and business leaders, advocating to use these tools to make better and smarter decisions.
Wow. Wow. So you mentioned, was it conscious corporations or
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, actually, I did a couple of independent studies with Professor Gerard Farias here at FDU just recently. And they have basically in the management field have been studying the conscious organizations. The main point I got from a lot of those studies is that when corporations first existed, came into being, they were there to serve society as well as make a profit. Right? They build it, they give a product, they give a service, and they help society. Well, in the last 50 or plus years, we've gotten away from that somewhat. I always think about the movie Pretty Woman. They're buying and selling companies, not producing anything, shifting out all of the resources and stripping the employees and just making a profit and selling the company. And then they're not serving anyone. In fact, I saw that in the software business where there are a lot of independent software companies producing excellent products with excellent support. A larger company would come and take them over, buy them out. And okay, they get wonderful monies, especially for independent owners. But then they would strip research and development, they would strip support and services, and they would just basically take renewals for several years and not provide anything. The bottom line is that model is not sustainable. In the short term, they're making money, but in the long term, it's not sustainable. And so they in the business world and in the business schools are trying to alert people to the fact that long range, this is not sustainable. So we need to bring more consciousness into the business world, which really means care about all of the stakeholders, not just the shareholders. And the stakeholders, of course, are not only the shareholders, but the employees, the vendors, the clients, et cetera. And there are a lot of companies doing that now. Patagonia and many companies are doing that now. They care a lot more about the employees, about everyone around them, knowing that that's a good long-term strategy. So that's what I call a conscious organization.
I love it. Well, I just wrote for my certification and in my new book, when the unthinkable happens, be prepared, be ready. I talk about sustainability, and there is a ranking out there now that 70% of the businesses that are traded on NASDAQ actually have. It's called ESG. And so E is environmental sustainability. S is social sustainability, which is what you're talking about. And then governance. And so we can actually look at now the rankings of all the different companies we're working with, like Patagonia is a really good example of how they're giving back and making a difference. And we can actually choose with our dollars what companies we're going to choose to work with because they are being sustainable in all those three areas. So I think that's conscious organizations. I can't wait to read your book. I just cannot wait.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So how do people, if they want to reach out to you, how do they reach out to you?
Yeah. Okay. Well, on my website, I have well now it's two websites and now a third one for the book. So one is Prinzivalli-consulting.com, or the other is consciousbasedimprov.com. And on there is my contact information, my email, my phone numbers. So by all means, just pop on the website and be happy to chat with you, either about business issues or about improv issues or mindfulness issues, or well, like for corporations, one of the things I'll do is work with them in a traditional business consulting environment, just working on their business needs. I can integrate mindfulness techniques for them. And what I also do is improvisational workshops for their team. Like years ago, they used to go on weekends to sort of gain camaraderie and teamwork and et cetera. But now we can do it on the site in a 2-3 hour workshop. What I can do is provide them with a fun experience of all improvisational exercises and games. But I will actually tailor them to the issues that the company is having. So I'll work with the CEO and say, what are your issues? What would you like me to focus on? And I will design specifically exercises for that. So in 2-3 hours, they'll have lots of fun. Their creativity will emerge. They'll loosen up, and they will do exercises that will actually address some of the issues of the company. So after working with the CEO one-on-one, he or she might want me to work with their team in terms of something like that. So I'm happy to do any of those things.
All right. Well, everyone, you need to check out his book in a couple of weeks, Improvisational Leaders. And I'm going to pop up my book that just came out last week called
Nice.
When the Unthinkable Happens, Be Prepared, Be Ready. And it is a book that makes the ideal marketing tool for you to take out to your community. If you're working with consumers or small businesses, I highly recommend it. So, Bill, thank you so much for being on. It's been such a pleasure, and I've really loved getting to know you. We both belong to a really good networking group, and so that's how we met. So
Great.
Thank you so much for being on. I really, really appreciate it, and I look forward to when you get your book, I'll post about it. So,
Thank you so much, Connie. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody.
Okay.
Another fantastic Kick Butt Leadership interview. Another one is about to come down the road, so stay tuned. Bye now.